Michel de Nostradamus, later known as Nostradamus, was born in December 1503 in the French province of Provence. His birth, probably on the 14th or 21st of that month in Saint-Rémy de Provence, marked the beginning of a remarkable life. His parents, the notary Jacques de Nostradamus and Renée, granddaughter of a respected physician, gave birth to at least 9 offspring. The Nostradamus family history was marked by their Jewish ancestry. At a time when Jews in France were under strong pressure to convert, Michel's grandfather, a moneylender from Avignon, had converted to the Catholic faith. On this occasion he took the name Pierre and chose the family name Nostradamus, Our Lady, as a symbol of his conversion. These Jewish roots may have influenced Michel's later works. Jewish mysticism, especially the Kabbalah, was widespread in late medieval Europe. It dealt with the relationship between the eternal God and the mortal world, used ambiguous language, and often dealt with apocalyptic themes. At the age of 14, Michel began studying grammar, rhetoric, and logic at the University of Avignon. However, an outbreak of the plague forced him to abandon his studies, after which he traveled around Western Europe and gained practical medical experience. Medicine at the time was based mainly on folk medicine and empirical practices, with bloodletting being a common treatment method. In the 1520s, Michel settled in the south of France as a pharmacist. An attempt to study at the prestigious medical school in Montpellier failed because of his previous work as a pharmacist. Nevertheless, he developed into a respected plague doctor who achieved success with his advanced hygiene measures, even if his famous rose pills were ineffective. His first marriage ended tragically when his wife and 2 children fell victim to the plague in 1534. After a period of travel and a brief accusation of heresy, he settled in Salon de Provence, where he married the wealthy widow and Ponsard and had 6 more children. In 1550, Nostradamus began his literary career by publishing almanacs containing astrological predictions in the form of 4-line poems. The success of these publications encouraged him to write his main work, The Prophecies. These consisted of 942 enigmatic quatrains that were intended to predict future events. His prophecies reached the French royal court, where Catherine de' Medici became his patron, appointing him royal advisor and personal physician after some of his predictions seemed to come true. In his last years, Nostradamus wrote further works on Egyptian hieroglyphs and medical topics. His health deteriorated steadily due to gout and dropsy until he died on July 1st or 2, 1566. His grave in the Franciscan Church of Salon experienced a varied fate that corresponded to his mysterious afterlife. Nostradamus' prophecies have fascinated people for centuries. Many of his quatrains have subsequently been linked to significant historical events, from the Great Fire of London to the World Wars. However, the interpretations remain controversial because his texts were deliberately vague and ambiguously formulated. His grim predictions of catastrophes and upheavals still find an interested audience today, who believe they recognize in them clues to future events. Nostradamus is omnipresent in modern pop culture. His prophecies have inspired numerous books, television programs, and documentaries. He even appears as a mysterious figure in video games such as Assassin's Creed. His predictions are studied intensively, especially in times of crisis, when people are looking for explanations and guidance. It is noteworthy that Nostradamus had no formal training in astrology or occult arts. His main occupation was that of a physician and plague doctor. His practical experience with death and destruction during the plague epidemics probably shaped his gloomy worldview, which is reflected in his prophecies. The enduring fascination with Nostradamus is largely due to the clever vagueness of his writing. His quatrains are phrased in such a way that they can be applied to a variety of events. The unbroken series of portents of death, disasters, famines, and plagues in his writings appeal to fundamental human fears and give his prophecies a timeless quality. Almost 5 centuries after they were written, Nostradamus' verses are still being scoured for clues to future apocalyptic events. The interpretation of his prophecies remains the subject of controversial debate between those who see them as genuine predictions and others who see them as cleverly worded texts open to interpretation. Interpretations of Nostradamus' prophecies have evolved over the centuries. His coded messages, which he wrote in a mixture of French, Latin, Greek, and Provençal, offer an almost inexhaustible scope for interpretation. This linguistic diversity was not chosen by chance, but served as a shield against possible accusations of heresy or black magic. The scientific debate about Nostradamus' work has gone through various phases. While earlier generations often viewed his prophecies uncritically as divine revelations, a more differentiated view developed in the 20th century. Modern researchers are increasingly examining the historical context of his writings and the literary sources from which he drew. A special feature of his prophecies is the almost complete lack of specific dates. Nostradamus only mentions 9 specific dates between 1588 and the year 3797. This temporal indeterminacy allows later generations to continually reinterpret his texts and relate them to current events. His cyclical view of history, in which wars, natural disasters, and political upheavals repeat themselves, reinforces this interpretative flexibility. The quatrains cover an astonishing geographical range. His predictions span from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, from the Black Sea to Eastern Europe. This far-reaching geographical perspective reflects the expanding world knowledge of the Renaissance and makes his prophecies relevant to a global audience. The literary quality of his texts is also remarkable. The quatrains are artfully constructed and combine historical allusions with mythological elements. His descriptions of wars, natural disasters, and political upheavals are often of captivating poetic power, even if their meaning remains enigmatic. The aftermath of his prophecies is particularly evident in times of crisis. During the 2 world wars, the Cuban Missile Crisis, after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and during the coronavirus pandemic, his texts were searched intensively for possible predictions of these events. This recurring engagement with his prophecies in times of uncertainty shows how much people are looking for orientation and explanations in seemingly chaotic situations. Academic research has now identified many of the sources that Nostradamus used for his prophecies. He drew on ancient historians such as Plutarch and Suetonius, studied medieval prophecies, and processed contemporary astrological works. However, this source research does not diminish the fascinating effect of his texts, which in their encrypted form continue to leave room for a variety of interpretations. The modern reception of Nostradamus is characterized by a tension between scientific analysis and popular interpretation. While the academic world examines his texts as historical documents of their time, many people still see in them prophetic messages of timeless validity. This duality of interpretation is an essential part of the ongoing fascination with Nostradamus. His prophecies have also had a significant influence on modern apocalyptic literature and the genre of future predictions. The technique he developed of ambiguous prophecy, which allows for various interpretations, has been widely imitated but rarely achieved the poetic power and cultural impact of the original. The enduring importance of Nostradamus is reflected not least in the constant reinterpretation of his texts in the light of current events. Whether climate change, technological progress, or geopolitical conflicts, his quatrains always seem to reveal new levels of meaning. This interpretative flexibility, coupled with the gloomy mood of his prophecies, secures Nostradamus a permanent place in the cultural memory of humanity. The ambiguity of Nostradamus' prophecies is particularly evident in the way in which different generations interpret his texts differently. His encrypted messages are constantly being reinterpreted, depending on the historical context and cultural background. This interpretative diversity is further enhanced by his deliberately chosen complex language in symbolic expression. The effect of his prophecies on the collective consciousness is remarkable. In times of social upheaval and crisis, people increasingly turn to his texts, looking for hidden clues and possible parallels to the present. This cyclical return of interest in his predictions reflects a fundamental human need for orientation and a search for meaning. A special feature of his prophetic texts is the interweaving of different time levels. In his quatrains, Nostradamus combines the past, present, and future into a complex web of meanings. This temporal interweaving enables later readers to continually relate his text to their respective historical situation. The literary structure of his prophecies deserves special attention. The quatrains are not only complex in content, but also artistically designed in form. The use of metaphors, symbols, and historical allusions creates a dense web of meaning that opens up various levels of interpretation. In recent decades, Scientific research into his text has brought new insights into his working methods. The analysis of his sources shows that Nostradamus systematically studied historical, astrological, and prophetic works of his time and incorporated them into his own texts. This source research reveals the intellectual depth of his work. What is particularly interesting is the way in which Nostradamus processed historical events in his prophecies. He often drew on known historical patterns and projected them into the future, which gave his predictions a certain historical plausibility. This technique of historical analogy makes his text understandable even for modern readers. The geographical breadth of his prophecies is impressive. His predictions extend across Europe and the Mediterranean to the Middle East. This wide-ranging perspective gives his text a universal dimension and makes them relevant to an international audience. Another important aspect of his prophecies is their apocalyptic tone. The frequent descriptions of catastrophes, wars, and upheavals appeal to fundamental human fears. This gloomy worldview resonates with his readers, especially in times of crisis. The reception of his texts in different cultures and eras shows interesting differences. While some cultures take his prophecies literally, others see them as more symbolic or allegorical. This cultural diversity of interpretation enriches the understanding of his texts. Modern media society has brought about new forms of engagement with Nostradamus. His prophecies are discussed and analyzed in documentaries, television series, and on the internet. This media distribution contributes to the continued popularity of his texts. The question of the authenticity of his predictions remains the subject of controversial discussions. While skeptics point to the vagueness and ambiguity of his texts, supporters see this very openness as a sign of their timeless validity. This debate reflects fundamental questions about the nature of prophetic texts. The linguistic design of his prophecies deserves special attention. The use of different languages and dialects, the complex metaphors, and the rhythmic structure of the quatrains are evidence of high literary skill. This linguistic complexity contributes to the multi-layered nature of his texts. The ongoing study of Nostradamus in the present shows that his prophecies have lost none of their fascination. Whether as historical documents, literary works of art, or prophetic texts, his quatrains remain a source of inspiration and interpretation for every new generation. The relevance of Nostradamus' prophecies is particularly evident in their applicability to contemporary problems. His predictions about climate catastrophes, political upheavals, and social changes seem more relevant to many people today than ever before. The ecological crises of our time seem to find their counterpart in his grim visions of natural disasters and environmental destruction. The methodical investigation of his working methods has brought new insights into the origins of the prophecies. It is clear that Nostradamus did not make arbitrary predictions, but systematically analyzed historical patterns and projected them into the future. His intensive study of historical sources and contemporary events formed the basis of his prophetic work. The literary quality of his texts is increasingly appreciated. The artfully constructed quatrains combine poetic expressiveness with symbolic depth. The use of various linguistic levels and rhetorical devices testifies to a high level of literary mastery. This aesthetic dimension of his prophecies contributes significantly to their lasting impact. A special feature of his prophecies is their cyclical conception of time. Nostradamus did not see history as a linear development, but as the recurrence of certain basic patterns. This cyclical perspective makes it possible to continually relate his texts to current events. The international reception of his prophecies shows interesting cultural differences. While some cultures view his texts primarily as historical documents, others see them as timeless wisdom or concrete instructions for action for the present. This cultural diversity of interpretation enriches the understanding of his texts. The digital revolution has opened up new possibilities for the analysis and interpretation of his prophecies. Computer-aided text analyses provide new insights into the structure and meaning of his quatrains. Global networking promotes the exchange of different approaches and interpretations. The psychological dimension of his prophecies deserves special attention. His texts address basic human fears and hopes. The grim visions of catastrophes and upheavals correspond to deep-seated collective fears. At the same time, his prophecies also offer comfort and orientation in uncertain times. Scientific research into his sources has shown that Nostradamus was not only a prophet, but also a scholar. His intensive study of ancient texts, astrological works, and contemporary chronicles testifies to his broad education. This intellectual foundation gives his prophecies particular depth and complexity. The linguistic design of his texts proves to be highly complex upon closer analysis. The interweaving of different language levels, the use of symbolic codes, and the rhythmic structure of the quatrains are evidence of conscious artistic design. This formal complexity corresponds to the content-related complexity of his prophecies. The social relevance of his texts is particularly evident in times of crisis. His prophecies offer patterns of interpretation for apparently chaotic developments and help to classify crisis-like events. This orientating function explains the enduring popularity of his texts. Nostradamus' media presence has reached new dimensions in recent decades. His prophecies are addressed in documentaries, feature films, and digital media. This media distribution contributes to updating and popularizing his texts. The ongoing discussion about the authenticity of his predictions reflects fundamental epistemological questions. The debate about the possibility and limits of prophetic knowledge is exemplified using his texts as an example. This philosophical dimension gives the discussion of Nostradamus particular depth. The cultural and historical significance of his prophecies is undisputed. His texts have influenced European thought for centuries and continue to shape the idea of prophetic literature to this day. This cultural impact makes Nostradamus a key figure in European intellectual history. The enduring significance of Nostradamus' prophecies manifests itself in various dimensions of contemporary culture. His texts are not only studied as historical documents, but also influence modern ideas about the future and fate. The prophetic tradition he founded continues to have an impact to the present day. The analytical examination of his texts has opened up new perspectives. Modern research methods enable a deeper understanding of his working methods and sources. The interdisciplinary study of his prophecies combines historical, linguistic, and cultural studies approaches. The symbolic language of his quatrains proves to be particularly suitable for modern interpretations. The ambiguous images and metaphors allow for a variety of interpretations and updates. This interpretative openness makes his text relevant for each generation. The social function of his prophecies has changed over time. While they were originally understood as concrete predictions, today they often serve as a projection surface for collective fears and hopes. This psychological dimension explains their lasting effect. The media processing of his prophecies has created new forms of reception. His texts are interpreted and adapted in various media formats. This media transformation contributes to the updating and popularization of his predictions. The scientific study of his sources and methods shows the complexity of his prophetic work. The combination of historical knowledge, astrological tradition, and literary design makes his texts unique documents of their time. The linguistic virtuosity of his prophecies deserves special attention. The artistic interweaving of different language levels and layers of meaning testifies to a high level of literary mastery. This formal complexity corresponds to the depth of the content of his texts. The cultural impact of his prophecies can be seen in various areas. His texts have not only influenced prophetic literature, but have also left their mark on art, music, and popular culture. This broad cultural reception underlines his historical significance. The philosophical dimension of his prophecies is increasingly recognized. His texts raise fundamental questions about the relationship between time, history, and human knowledge. This philosophical depth makes them objects of ongoing reflection. The international impact of his prophecies has given rise to various cultural patterns of interpretation. His texts are interpreted and updated in different cultural contexts in their own way. This intercultural dimension broadens the understanding of his prophecies. The psychological impact of his texts is based on their ability to address basic human experiences. The grim visions of catastrophes and upheavals correspond to collective fears and anxieties. At the same time, his prophecies also offer patterns for interpreting and dealing with critical situations. The literary analysis of his texts has provided new insights into their formal and content-related structure. The complex interweaving of different levels of meaning and rhetorical devices testifies to conscious artistic design. This aesthetic dimension contributes significantly to the lasting effect of his prophecies. The historical significance of his texts lies not least in their ability to connect different time levels. His prophecies create connections between the past, present, and future. This temporal entanglement makes them unique documents of historical reflection. The ongoing fascination with Nostradamus is reflected in the constant reinterpretation of his texts. Every generation finds new meanings and relevance in his prophecies. This interpretative diversity ensures that his work has a permanent place in cultural memory. The ongoing relevance of Nostradamus' prophecies is particularly evident in their adaptability to modern problems. His predictions about global changes, social upheavals, and ecological crises appear remarkably timely in the context of current developments. The hermeneutic examination of his texts has led to new methodological approaches. The analysis of his prophecies requires a combination of various scientific disciplines, from philology to history and cultural anthropology. This methodological diversity enables a deeper understanding of his prophetic work. The digital revolution has opened up new possibilities for text analysis. Computer-aided studies of his quatrains reveal previously unrecognized structures and patterns of meaning. Technological developments enable new perspectives on his prophetic texts. The social significance of his prophecies is particularly evident in times of crisis and uncertainty. His texts offer orientation and patterns of interpretation for seemingly chaotic developments. This stabilizing function explains their continued popularity. The media transformation of his prophecies has created new forms of reception. His texts are interpreted, adapted, and updated in various media formats. This media diversity contributes to the continuous presence of his predictions in the public consciousness. Cultural studies have shown the complex interactions between his prophecies and different cultural contexts. His texts are interpreted and appropriated in specific ways in different cultural contexts. This cultural dynamic expands the understanding of his prophetic work. The linguistic complexity of his prophecies is revealed through detailed linguistic analyses. The use of different language levels, rhetorical figures, and symbolic codes testifies to conscious artistic design. This linguistic virtuosity gives his texts particular depth. The philosophical dimension of his prophecies is increasingly recognized in current research. His texts raise fundamental questions about the relationship between time, history, and human knowledge. This philosophical depth makes them objects of ongoing reflection. The psychological impact of his texts is based on their ability to address collective fears and hopes. His dark visions correspond to deep-seated social anxieties. At the same time, his prophecies also offer models for dealing with critical situations. The literary analysis of his text has provided new insights into their formal and content-related structure. The complex interweaving of different levels of meaning testifies to a high level of artistic mastery. This aesthetic dimension contributes significantly to the lasting impact of his prophecies. The historical significance of his texts lies not least in their ability to connect different time levels. His prophecies create connections between the past, present, and future. This temporal entanglement makes them unique documents of historical reflection. The international reception of his prophecies has produced various cultural patterns of interpretation. His texts are interpreted and updated in different cultural contexts in their own way. This intercultural dimension broadens the understanding of his prophetic work. The development of research history shows an increasing differentiation of approaches to interpretation. In addition to traditional historical and philological methods, interdisciplinary approaches are gaining in importance. This methodological diversity enriches the academic discussion of his texts. The social relevance of his prophecies is manifested in their continuous updating. Each generation finds new meanings and references to its own time in his texts. This interpretative dynamic ensures that his work has a lasting place in cultural memory. The enduring importance of Nostradamus' prophecies is reflected in their remarkable ability to adapt to contemporary issues. His texts are continually reinterpreted and related to current social developments. The ambiguity of his prophecies proves to be a particular strength. In recent years, The academic study of his texts has developed new methodological approaches. The combination of different research perspectives enables a more differentiated understanding of his prophetic work. Digital analysis methods open up new approaches to his texts. The cultural impact of his prophecies extends across various areas of society. His texts not only influence the popular understanding of the future and fate, but also inspire artistic and literary productions. This broad cultural reception underlines their lasting significance. The linguistic complexity of his quatrains is newly revealed through modern linguistic analyses. The use of different language levels and rhetorical devices testifies to conscious artistic design. This formal virtuosity corresponds to the depth of the content of his prophecies. The psychological dimension of his texts is gaining increasing importance in current research. His prophecies address fundamental human fears and hopes. This psychological depth explains their lasting impact on different generations. The historical significance of his prophecies lies in their ability to connect different time levels. His texts create connections between the past, present, and future. This temporal interweaving makes them unique documents of historical reflection. The international reception of his texts has produced various cultural patterns of interpretation. His prophecies are interpreted and updated in specific ways in different cultural contexts. This intercultural dimension broadens the understanding of his prophetic work. The media transformation of his prophecies has created new forms of reception. His texts are adapted and interpreted in various media formats. This media diversity contributes to the continuous presence of his predictions in the public consciousness. The philosophical depth of his prophecies is increasingly recognized in current research. His texts raise fundamental questions about the relationship between time, history, and human knowledge. This philosophical dimension makes them objects of ongoing reflection. The literary analysis of his texts shows their complex formal and content-related structure. The interweaving of different levels of meaning testifies to a high level of artistic mastery. This aesthetic dimension contributes significantly to the lasting effect of his prophecies. The social relevance of his texts is particularly evident in times of crisis. His prophecies offer orientation and patterns of interpretation for seemingly chaotic developments. This stabilizing function explains their continued popularity. The development of research history shows an increasing differentiation of approaches to interpretation. In addition to traditional historical and philological methods, interdisciplinary approaches are gaining in importance. This methodological diversity enriches the academic discussion of his texts. Cultural studies have shown the complex interactions between his prophecies and different cultural contexts. His texts are interpreted and appropriated in different contexts in specific ways. This cultural dynamic expands the understanding of his prophetic work. The enduring fascination with Nostradamus is reflected in the continuous reinterpretation of his texts. Each generation finds new meanings and relevance in his prophecies. This diversity of interpretation ensures that his work has a lasting place in the cultural memory of humanity.